criminal under 53A-117K. It's criminal damage to a landlord's property in the first degree. It's a Class D felony. So if 10 years down the road, the tenant applied to that specific landlord, the landlord who had the damage, applied to live in that unit, and the landlord denied that person, a suit could be brought against the landlord for discrimination under this bill. Is that correct?
It depends. First, that assuming that the individual has not been convicted of another crime within the intervening period. If there's a conviction of an intervening or charge pending with respect to any other criminal violation, then no, that's not the case. And also, as I understand this, this bill would not apply to a landlord who lives in an owner-occupied dwelling of 5 or fewer units. So if it's the case of the 3-family house and the landlord lives on the middle floor, then no, not in that instance either. So I think it depends on the circumstances. Okay, so then I understand those exceptions. So, but in the circumstance where there hasn't been a crime in between the 10 years subsequent, and the landlord doesn't live on the property, and it's not those specific number of units, that the landlord would be discriminating, and a suit could be brought against him by CHRO in the case where he denies somebody who has damaged his property and was convicted, even though it was 10 years ago. A suit could still be brought against that landlord under this bill. Assuming
no exceptions.
Assuming no exceptions, and in that narrow circumstance you just described, yes, conceivably.
Okay. And then, of course, I guess it goes without saying that if it was damage to criminal damage to a landlord's property first degree, and even if it was another landlord wouldn't be able to use that against the tenant, even though they sprayed red paint and rice all over the unit. It made the news, made national news. 10 years ago, that landlord, and even though it was somebody else, wouldn't be able to say no because you damaged this person's property, $30,000 worth of damage. The landlord still would not be able to say no after 10 years.
Again, assuming in the narrow instance where none of the exceptions apply, yes, that's correct.
There's things like enticing a minor under 53A-90A, which I believe is it's a Class D felony. Would that also be one of the, I think it's a Class C or D felony, but either way, that would be wiped out after 10 years. Enticing a minor, or let's say child pornography, possession of child pornography, that would also be wiped out under this law.
I don't have the exact statute you're referencing in front of me, but if it doesn't fit one of the exceptions, then yes.
Okay, so, and even though it's 10 years, if I'm a single female, single mother living with my child in an apartment, a landlord can't deny somebody who was convicted of possession of child pornography or enticing a minor because it was 10 years ago, that the landlord would actually get sued. Even though, I'm a single mother in the house, in the apartment, sorry. Landlord has an obligation to protect the other tenants, not put them in, let's say, known harm's way, and probably could get sued. Let's face it, at the end of the day. Under this bill, that landlord would have to rent or could not deny that tenant, even though they were convicted of child pornography possession 10 years ago. They could not deny that felon housing under this bill. Is that correct?
Again, it sort of depends on the circumstances. I think what you're not, in your scenario, what you're not taking into account is the size of the dwelling unit. Certainly in a smaller dwelling unit, they probably could under the exception. The other thing you're not taking into account is any sort of court-ordered restraining orders, which would not be affected by this bill, or any sort of sex offender registration requirements, which again are not affected by this bill. So, it's a very fact-specific example you're giving, and I don't believe it's a straight yes or no based on the language of this bill.
But any restraining order would be against that individual, and the plaintiff or the victim and that person. If I'm somebody in a building, that doesn't help me at all. And in fact, my landlord's going to get sued because he can tell somebody, no, I have some very young children in this building, and it's probably not not a building for you. And I don't want to financially put myself at risk. That landlord is not able to say no, which I just can't believe what I'm reading right now. A lot of this bill I find very disturbing, that somebody who committed a crime against another individual, they would not be able to deny that person housing, for a crime committed against them. I just think that's crazy. Now we're re-victimizing victims and saying it's okay to, hey, now you have to rent back out to that individual. That example alone, I guess depending on how big the landlord isn't that far-fetched. And especially when you come from a smaller town like I do, it is fairly common. And the fact we would put women and children not only around people convicted of child pornography, but punish the landlord for not allowing that, is just, I'm just at this point, I'm not surprised anymore. I'm not surprised that we put women and children in that type of situation. Nothing surprises me. So that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.